Hi everyone, welcome to the raspberry and yogurt cake. Hopefully you've got everything ready to go. I'm just going to line the tin for you. Sometimes you can use a spring form tin. I prefer to use a solid one for this cake. It comes out quite easily, so you don't need to worry about it at all. So what we're going to do is get a pencil. I've got some baking paper here. We are just going to draw around the baking paper like that. And then we need to cut out the circle. It can be quite rough, it doesn't really matter. As long as we cut out or cut within the circle that we've drawn, basically so that the round that we end up with will fit inside the tin, and also so we don't get any of the pencil in our cooking. So around we go. There's a couple of ways to do this. You can do exactly what I'm doing now. I do have a non-stick pan, but I tend to worry that it's going to stick anyway, so I will line and grease mine slightly. But if it's non-stick, you don't need to go to too much trouble. The other thing you can do is to oil it or grease it all through, and then flour it. So if you do that, you end up putting butter or oil all around the inside and up the sides, especially in the corners. You put in a couple of tablespoons of plain flour, shake it around so it's covered all of the oil or the butter in there, and that way you end up with it's non-stick. It's the old-fashioned way of making things non-stick, basically. Your round goes in there like that, and it should fit really well because A, we measured it, and B, we cut on the inside. What I do, there's a couple of ways to do this. You can use a spray oil. If you're going to spray it, you need to make sure that it's a light vegetable oil, not olive oil. Olive oil is too heavy. It's a cake. It's sweet. Olive oil doesn't really sit particularly well with that. So a light canola, if you're going to spray, or you can do what I do, which is to use the inside of the butter packet that I've used for the butter, and you just butter all the way around. You need to keep that steady. It's particularly important to butter up the sides because that's not covered. All right, now this is a 20-inch pan. You can do a smaller pan. If you do that, you need to increase the cooking time because it'll increase the height of your cake. This is a really low flat cake, but it's good. It's perfect for like dessert sort of cake, morning tea, that sort of thing. All right, so just make sure it's well covered. All right, that's that done. So we can put this aside now and wait until we need to use it. So the first thing we're going to do is the topping. So you'll see that you've got a topping for this one that includes almonds, and you've got an actual base of your cake. Now that I've lined that, you need to light your oven. So light it to 180 for a normal baking oven, about 170 for a fan-forced oven. You'll also need to make sure that your shelves are in the center of the oven. So not too high, not really low. Things that cook quickly, go at the top. Things that cook slowly, go at the bottom. Things like cake, which is a medium cooking time, should go in the center. Okay, so what I've got with me right now is our, just for the topping, now I have doubled it. Okay, so from the recipe, it asks for 1.5 tablespoons of just white sugar and 1.5 tablespoons of flour and 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon and 20 grams of butter. I've actually doubled that, and I know I mentioned that in our lesson plan. I double it because I don't use the almonds. I don't particularly like almonds. I don't think it adds anything to the flavour, but that's personal preference. So instead of putting the almonds in, I just double the amount of the topping. Okay, now I did tell you that one part of your butter, the 20 or 40 grams in my case, should be fairly well chilled. while the butter for the cake needs to be at room temperature. So I actually ended up having to put my butter away because if all my butter got really warm. It's quite a warm day today. So I've just let it chill for a little while. Okay. So what you can do is just use a knife to cut your butter up a bit smaller. And our job right now is a process called rubbing in. Okay, so you can do this in here. You don't need to cut it up before you get it out. Just make your butter a little bit smaller. Now then, if it's a hot day, what I suggest you do is cool your hands down in some cool water from the tap first. And when we do this, or when we're rubbing in, the trick is not to get any of the mixture on the palms of your hand. So the palms of your hand are the warmest part of your hand. We don't want this butter to melt. If this butter melts, it's going to melt through everything. It's not going to be a crumble, and that's what we're aiming for. So we're going to use our fingertips to rub in. We're going to lift, okay? So rub it through. We're going to lift and rub at the same time. Okay, now you can see I'm just using my fingertips and rubbing it through. It'll take a little bit of a bit more time right at the start because we've got some bigger pieces of butter, but eventually you'll get that right. Now then, if you do this if you squash it in too much, you end up with just a big ball of butter, flour, sugar, and cinnamon. That's what you want to avoid. So you have to be nice and quick, actions nice and quick, and just using your fingertips. If it's a really warm day, just make sure everything's chilled first, including the bowl. That will stop it from melting through. After I do this, I usually put it in the fridge as well for the same reason. Your house can heat up with the oven on, and you are heating it up in the kitchen. So the room can get quite warm, and if that does that, you can end up with your topping looking more like a ball of oil than actual crumble, which is what it is supposed to look like. All right, so you can see that it's starting to change there, that it's starting to resemble sort of a fine breadcrumb. Now then, at this stage, I want to know if there's anything left over, so that needs to be rubbed in. A bit of a shake will make the bigger bits go to the top, and then you can deal with them. Doesn't have to be perfect. It is a topping for the cake, and it will be going into the oven. So some of those larger pieces of butter will melt through. That's the whole point. But you do want them coating that flour so they sit, they don't sort of move back together or melt back together when it's cooking. Okay? And that's about right. Give it a bit of a go through, and that's it. Now it is warmish in here, so I am definitely going to put that into the fridge. If it's really, really hot, just popping the butter in the freezer for a little while first can really, really help. So that's that bit done. Okay, so now we're on to the rest of the cake. So right here, I have not doubled this. Remember, I only doubled the top bit because I was avoiding the almonds. This is 100 grams of butter. We've got an egg. We've got vanilla essence. We've got flour. We've got sugar, half a cup. And we've got a quarter of a cup of Greek yogurt. So all of these ingredients are functioning in our cake in some way or another. And there's one that I did forget that's really important, and that is our baking powder. Okay? So basically, it's important for us to get the measurement right, and it's important for us to get the process right when you are making a cake. So the first thing we would do is add the sugar, half a cup of sugar, to the 100 grams of butter. My butter's really, really soft. I don't recommend you put the butter into the microwave to soften it. That is a disaster. If it melts too much, this part of the process will not happen correctly. So you need the butter to be whole. We are going to beat it with hand beaters. If you've got one of the KitchenAid at home, it will also work perfectly. Mine are just ordinary, regular kitchen beaters. Now then, this start of our cake, this is the important bit because, sorry, I've just realised I've still got stuff on my fingers and I don't want it there because it's so, when we start using the beaters to cut through the butter, what is also cutting through the butter is the sugar. And where the sugar cuts through the butter, you are actually dragging air through. So it's the start of the aeration process for the cake. Cake should be light and fluffy. That's the whole point. Nobody wants a heavy cake. That's not the ideal finished product, not the ideal sensory properties. We want a light, fluffy cake. So what we do when we make it all goes towards the sensory properties. So the first part that we do is beating these together. It begins the aeration process. The second thing we will do is beat through the egg, and that also continues the aeration process. So with this one, as we beat the egg through, we are denaturing the protein in the egg, and by denaturing the protein, we are allowing it to trap air. And that's the first function of that egg. The flour that we're going to add with our baking powder, the flour will add some structure, and that's helped by the egg. So when the egg cooks, it will start to help to form the structure of the cake by setting. Just as when you fry an egg, you'll see the egg change. The same thing happens in the oven. It's just that there's other ingredients there. So it sets in a similar way. This is aided by the flour, and the baking powder actually adds aeration as well. So aeration, 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 because we want a light, fluffy, aerated cake. Obviously, the vanilla is for flavour, as are the raspberries, which we will get in, we'll put in the end, and they should still be in the freezer. And definitely, so therefore, adding to the sensory properties. Also adding to the sensory properties is our Greek yogurt. Usually, or often when you make cakes, you put in a little bit of milk. It just adds a little bit of moisture in there. But the yogurt adds to tenderness of the actual cake. So cakes with yogurt in tend to be a bit more moist and much more tender. The other thing that's adding tenderness to our cake is the butter. Okay, so just a quick discussion of the functions of all our ingredients. So, as we know then, this part of our process is really important. So we're going to beat these two together until they're light and fluffy. Okay, so once the first part's incorporated, if your butter's too hard still, just press it through with a fork before you do this, otherwise everything's going to end up everywhere. And it's up to high now. Once it starts to get a bit lighter, it's a good idea just to scrape down the sides, and you should be able to see that it is lighter. Reason being that, like I said, we've started to drag that air through, it's increased in volume, and that increase in volume lightens the colour. hopefully you can see now that it is much paler than it was before. All right, our next job is to add the egg. Now, like I've told you, the egg functions to aerate and also to give structure. We just need to beat it slightly. Now, the problem with egg is that this is basically what we've got here is a fat base, a mixture that is fat, and egg is water-based. It's a protein, but it's not fatty to the extent that the butter is. So if we just put this in straight away, you're going to get it will split. Okay, if it splits, it's not a disaster. Your cake will still work, but the sensory properties will be affected. So the way to do this is to get our beater up on high and to add the egg a little bit at a time. Start, you can add quite a lot. The more you do this, so the more egg that's in there, the less you should add. Okay, so by agitating it, we are first changing the shape of the protein in the egg so that it aerates and entraps air, and we are also creating an emulsion. So an emulsion stabilizes a water and fat. Now you should be able to see that it's really light and fluffy, and that's the idea. The longer you spend at this point, the more light and fluffy your cake will become. I like to spend a lot of time doing this, first because I actually kind of enjoy it. Secondly, it really does have an effect on the final product if you get this bit right. I'm just going to mix this in, and we're done. Now then, if we go back to the recipe, it says to make sure your flour is sifted. It helps to aerate as well. So that's certainly a step that you can take. Mine's sitting over there already done. What I do tend to do is add my baking powder to the flour. It just makes it a bit easier. It spreads it through and goes in there a whole lot more easily. So we need a teaspoon of baking powder, and in it goes. So this is 3/4 of a cup of plain flour. We've just added the baking powder, so it's now like a self-raising flour. And that will, like I said, affect the final product too. So our recipe says to gradually beat in the egg, which we've done. Add the vanilla essence, so we need 1/2 teaspoon of this. This is not enough to worry about it causing it to split. It should be fine. And in it goes. I love vanilla. It's pretty much one of my favourite flavours and aromas. Okay, and that's done. So there's a couple of ways to do this from here. It says stir in half the sifted flour and baking powder, stir in the Greek yogurt, then stir in the remaining flour and baking powder. I tend to use the beaters for this stage. You can stir it through. I suggest you don't stir as in around. I would fold it through, so around like that, mainly because, so with folding, quarter turn and fold, okay? The reason that I would suggest that is because you've just spent ages putting a whole bunch of air into your mixture. You don't want to spend a couple of minutes making sure it all goes out by just stirring it through, okay? So I definitely cheat on this one. It's a cake I make often. This bit does make a bit of a mess, so in that goes. It does. And just for your own information, if you end up with your mixture splitting, and it will kind of look like, it kind of looks like baby vomit, to be honest. It's all lumpy and bumpy and a bit gross. A little bit of flour in the mix can just help to stop that from happening. So it can stabilise it a bit, okay? Then in the rest of that goes, in goes the yogurt. Now this is a low-fat one. High-fat is better, to be honest with you. But I don't use the high-fat one at home, so I'm using the one that I've got. Now you don't want to overwork it at this time. Overworking leads to the development of gluten in your cake. Cakes should be tender and light. And part of the reason why they probably suggest folding it in, you want to avoid producing or developing gluten. However, this is such a moist cake, I find that just beating it with the beaters doesn't do it any harm as long as you don't overdo it. And that's it. Okay, so the last thing we have to do is put in the berries. So mine are in the freezer. I've already weighed them out. You need 100 grams, okay, and they need to be frozen. This is about 100 grams, so if you don't have scales that you don't like using the scales, this is a cup, and it's a little bit heaped, okay? So this you also need to wet quickly, okay, especially if it's warm. So it's just a very quick fold through, literally like that. If you spend too long at this, you end up with the raspberries defrosting and they release juice because they've been frozen, and you end up with a pink cake, which sounds good, but it's a weird pink. So probably not a pink you want to have. So grab a spoon. Because this is such a sticky cake, what I tend to do is just place bits around my thing, my pan. Okay. I was just checking. There used to be a version of this recipe where you actually put the crumble on the bottom and then spread it out, but they did change it with this edition of the book. I'm not sure if it's better, but I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. As you can see, there's quite a few raspberries in there, which is really good. Okay, so I'm going to get the rest out of there. sure I use it all and that I've dotted it round reasonably well. Okay. You can use your hands for this, but don't press it because remember we've aerated. We don't want to press any of that air out. So it really is a matter of just dabbing it around and making sure that it's spread out reasonably well. So those raspberries are sticking together. Let's pull them apart because they are frozen. They do tend to reconnect. Okay, now I know it looks like I haven't spread it out very well, but in the cooking process, everything in here will melt and sort of meld together anyway. So it's actually fine. As long as there's somewhere to place the crumble, that's all good. And that's it. You don't have to spend ages spreading it out because, like I said, the oven will do that for you. Okay, so I'm just getting the topping. I didn't cover it, but you definitely should at home, depending on what's in your fridge. So really, just sprinkle it over now. I've got heaps and heaps, probably more than I really need, to be honest with you. So I might not use all of it, but around it goes. Most of this will cook in. Most of it will just melt out over the top and give the top a really nice appearance. So that's it. It goes into the oven now. It goes into the oven for 25 to 30 minutes. So I'm going to stop off now and we'll come back when it's done. Okay, and just before I finish this bit, which I already had, but I forgot about doneness, basically you should be able to tell that this one is cooked if when you touch it gently in the center, it springs back. Or if you insert a skewer, the skewer comes out clean. But this cake can be a little bit deceiving because it is so moist on the inside. Also, the cake, if it's finished cooking, will not be making much noise. I know that sounds weird, but if you listen to a cake when it's cooking, it does make a particular sound, and that should have slowed down to almost stopped once it's cooked inside. What I do suggest you do when you get it out is let it sit for a little while. You will need to turn it out, but I will show you how to do that in the next section. Okay, so the cake is cooked. Just have a look at it there. I've let it sit for a little while. Should be nice and well, cool enough to take out. The reason we let it sit is because it's so hot inside that the cooking process tends to continue even after you've taken it out. So by letting things sit for a little while, it lets that cooking process finished. So we've got to get it out, okay? This is a tricky bit, and if this doesn't work, I'm just going to cut this part of the video out. I've already discussed it with my daughter. So center the plate over. It doesn't matter so much with the first plate, but you do need another one here. I've got my little cake dome one. And what we're going to do is, and you might need oven mitts to do this, and you're going to just flip it over. Okay. Then you very carefully lift it up. Okay. And what I suggest you do with the paper at the bottom, don't pull it up that way, pull it back. Okay. Mine's a little bit more well done on the outside. I did have a bit of trouble with my oven. I don't know if you guys know, but I did move last year, and I do have a new oven, and it doesn't always do the things that I think it's going to do. Okay, so next we get the bottom one and flip it over and quickly take that off. Okay, and you've got your cake hopefully out. And this one isn't centered as I would like, but that's okay. We need to now let it cool a little bit longer. I'm going to center it because basically I can't stand it if it's not. But as long as it's sitting nicely on the plate, you're pretty fine. The way I'm going to center it is just to... No, apparently I'm not, because I don't want it to be... Oh, come on. Again, it's pretty crumbly. That's normal for this cake, particularly because of the yogurt in there. So right now it's going to sit, it's going to cool, and I will serve up a piece shortly. Okay, the only thing that's left for us to do now is serve it. So I'm going to use a little dollop of cream. So it's basically thick cream. Just going to put a little bit there. That's probably enough. Here we go. I'll pop a couple, probably 3. You've heard me say it so many times, odd numbers look more natural on there. And a fork, a cake fork. And there we have it. Okay, so that's our beautiful raspberry and yogurt cake. Make sure you do keep it covered. Okay, it should last for a little while, but it's a cake that you probably should eat fairly quickly, but it will last a couple of days. As long as you, like I said, cover it, you don't need to refrigerate it. Okay.